Welcome to the FOD, where we bring you insights into the future of digital commerce for free. Season 5 is all about the move to composable architecture, and while it's not a buzzword anymore, there are still a number of unanswered questions, which is why I'm speaking to those who have the answers. In return, if you enjoy our content, we ask if you could like and share to spread the message far and wide. Hello, and welcome to our second episode in Season 5 of the FOD, the future of all things digital commerce. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mahil, MD of Lab Digital, to kick off the new season. If you've not had a chance to listen yet, it's well worth it. Today, I'd like to welcome Tomas Krag, CTO of NoA Ignite Denmark. Thomas and I met recently at the eCom Expo after I intercepted him walking back to his stand following his talk on composable commerce, how to avoid the glue monster. NoA Ignite is one of Denmark's leading full-service digital experience agencies born in 2000. Thomas joined the management team as CTO back in 2022, following previous leadership engagements at customer-side brands including Bang Olufsen and Hilding Anders International, as well as a long stint at Publicis and Sapient before this. That's my attempt at an intro. Over to you to tell your audience a little bit more, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for having me. I think that was a great intro. I mean, to add to that, since it's been almost 5 years now that I've worked quite exclusively with composable commerce and had a lot of different experiences on since we went that direction in 2018 at Bang Olufsen and built a composable technology stack there. With all the learnings that come from that, and then at Hilding Anders as well, and now back on the agency side. So I've had a lot of experience with e-commerce, and I've had a lot of experience with what we now call composable commerce in the last 5 years, and that's sort of what I'm trying to share the ups and downs of.
Nice. I think I noticed online you actually won an award with Bang Olufsen as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Bang Olufsen site won the at MACH won the first MACH conference. It won a MACH award for the best composable implementation.
Nice. So yeah, I guess certainly a man that we want to be speaking to, someone that's been there both from the customer side and now currently the agency side, leading the way in composable commerce. And hopefully the episode today is going to allow you to share some of your insights from the conversations that you've had over the last 5 or so years, both internally and externally, to help those that are at the start of their journey make the correct decisions based on their business requirements. So I guess let's kick things off by looking at the growth of composable, primarily from when you entered the arena. So how have you seen it grow, Thomas?
So I think, I mean, to go back, we have to take a step back before I think we were calling things composable or MACH. The first step in that journey was really the advent of headless, Jamstack, whatever you want to call it. There was a period in the last, I mean, in the early tens, when the move to sort of accelerate the load times of websites gave rise to this idea that we could build headless front ends, and it was sort of a slow burner, I think, in terms of challenging the monolithic sort of the need for the monolith to own the rendering of the website. So traditionally, CMSs, e-commerce platforms were also rendering engines, and they just weren't very good rendering engines. So a lot of the slowdown came from that, and with sort of Google's dominance and SEO's dominance, the need for speed was sort of really a driver towards headless, and that, I guess, brought with it a different kind of developer experience. And I think it's these two sort of trends, the continuing push for having great customer experiences that also load fast, and the understanding that to sort of continuously evolve your platforms, you need great developer experiences as well, that gave rise to what we now call composable, which is sort of taking the headless experience and replacing the monolith underneath it with multiple tools. So the recognition that once we're sort of at a headless front end where we interact with the back end through APIs, there's really nothing significant necessitating us to have a single backend. We can pretty easily replace that with multiple tools, and then that means we can choose. I guess we call that best of breed tools to replace single monoliths that do a lot of things, sort of at an average level. So I think that's sort of been the driver to get where we are here. And really, it's a little bit, it gets complicated because a lot of what's made possible, the types of implementations we can do today, is driven by developer experience, by the fact that new tools have arrived that just make building in this way easier. So both on the front end DevOps side, tools like Netlify, Vercel, so have made it much easier to work with headless front ends. And then on the middle layer, we've really seen tools come in that help with this decoupling of the multiple tools in the back end. Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about the drivers. I think, beyond this continuing need to have really fast load times, and when you couple that with the need to have custom built front ends, but you get to this need to innovate. So what I usually say is, one of the problems with monoliths is they have these cycles of replacement. So every 4 or 5 years, you realize that your monolith no longer does what your customers expect, and you need to replace it or have a major upgrade. And in that period, you're frozen. You can't innovate for a while, and customer expectations are really speeding up. So most brands can't live with 18 months of not providing new features or new customer experiences. And then there's a rising need for distinctiveness amongst brands as well, because we're really seeing a world in which competition is increasing, acquisition costs are increasing, and it's so easy for new players to come in on the e-commerce front with drop shipping, there's just a lot of opportunity for competition, and distinctiveness becomes more important. And then I think the final driver is sort of the challenge of composable, as in many cases, which is also what we experienced in Bang & Olufsen, been added complexity, but also really problematic employee experience. So you can get great customer experience, but problematic employee experience because of the multitude of tools. So now we're seeing a driver for really looking at employee experience and optimizing for that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to touch upon is, I guess employees have gone from one central system to possibly 5, 6, 7, maybe more. So it's that employee experience is also really important. But you touched upon right at the start, headless being the driver as to instigating the change, where we've then started to look at decoupling all of the parts of the back end as well. I mean, reality is we've been doing this for some time anyway, to a small extent, where we maybe have a specialist CMS or a specialist search as part of a bigger monolith. In your opinion, has there been like one pivotal moment in the last few years where we've really decided to say, actually, hang on a minute, if we're just going to put a specialist search in, why don't we do a PIM as well and a CMS, and really look at going best of breed for all of the different components?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the driver has been that commerce is complex. Like, commerce almost always has complex data flows, and with complex data flows, comes a lot of technical architecture complexity. And as you pointed out, there's never been, I mean, hardly ever been such a thing as pure monolith, because you could argue that if you have your Shopify or your BigCommerce, then each app you install in that universe also sort of consists of a separate system with separate tooling. So we've always added specific tools to our monolith to make them do what we needed. So I think the driver has been trying to break out of this monolithic ecosystem mindset, where if I had chosen a monolith, be it Salesforce Commerce Cloud, or be it Adobe Experience Manager or Sitecore or Shopify, I was limited to the ecosystem. So my best of breed limitations were really in a closed app store or a closed ecosystem of systems that were already interacting with that setup. And breaking out of that is sort of what Composable has brought us. So I think there's this idea that we've always lived with the complexity, but we've dealt with it by limiting ourselves to systems that we sort of knew worked in that context.
Yeah, okay. I guess the point you make there about living with what we've had in front of us has now changed, and there's now far more options available in front of us. That brings added complexities with it as well, though, right? Because you're now looking at best of breed, and you're looking at putting different platforms together. Some talk together, some talk between each other better than others. So how do you generally go around advising customers on I'll tell you, let me rephrase that. When it comes to speaking to customers, what would you recommend? Should the end customer pick the product first and then pick the agency to deliver the implementation, or should they pick the agency first to then give them advice on which products are best for the business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong in that respect. I think it matters a lot how, internally from a company, how mature you are, like how well you understand your own data flows, your own workflows, but also what technical skills you have. So I think both models can work. I think there's really a mindset change needed to really go composable, which is you should not be focusing on a specific product, but on an architecture. So the way, we try to think about it here at NoA Ignite is very much from a data-centric perspective. So our reference architecture doesn't consist of specific tools, but specific types of data. And you need to know what exactly the flow is of each of these data types. So you have in a classic e-commerce setup, you have customer data, you have transactional data, you have content, of course, you have product data, and each of those needs to be handled and managed in a way that enables all the different workflows and business models that you want to bring to market. And I think I think, step one to me is really understanding that. And if you have the maturity internally to do that yourself, I think I would strongly encourage that, because really, as a company, that's your business and you should own that business. If you don't have that maturity, but you're interested in going in that direction, then finding a good agency or system integrator that can help model that makes a lot of sense. But so I would probably put in a third way and say, data flow and data modeling first, and find the products that match those requirements that come out of that, either with an agency or without. I mean, that said, I think there's no such thing as a pure monolith, as we just discussed. There's always a lot of tools around it, be it analytics or personalization engines. There's also no such thing as pure composable. I mean, unless you really want to go into a full MACH microservice architecture, which I think is practically impossible for most businesses. So you're sort of choosing, I guess Gartner calls them packaged business components, or packaged business capabilities. In a sense, you're choosing a size in different areas of component that does, the bigger the component is, the more it handles, I guess the easier it is to deal with from a complexity perspective, but also the less flexible it's going to be. So you need to find that balance. And for me, I think what I usually argue is that the more distinct you want to be in an area as a business, the smaller the components should be ultimately. Okay. So if you're a business that wants to be, let's say you want to be really distinct in your supply chain, you want to be able to provide the best logistics, the best sort of delivery, then that's maybe where you should focus on breaking down your workflows into smaller sort of units and really go all best of breed. If you, as most sort of brands, if you want to be distinct in your customer experience, then of course you really need to think about breaking down what's closer to the customer experience, or the front end tools, which would typically be e-commerce engines and CMSs.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly the way that many have suggested breaking it down, is looking at what's most valuable to your business right now, and then starting there, seeing return on investment from there, and then moving on. Okay, well, is it going to be worthwhile us breaking this down and this down, and so on and so forth? We've started to see, particularly with commerce tools, the rise of pre-built connectors, or I think we've got Commerce Tools Connect, which my understanding as a non-techie is giving pre-built connectors between commerce tools and some of the other MACH approved ISVs. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's inevitable in the sense that, you know, everyone is looking for the advantages of Composable, so the flexibility of Composable, but trying to minimize the complexities. I think, you know, back to my point before, I think as a company, you need to own your own sort of data architecture and your own data flows and need to understand what moves where. And then I think you need to really sort of focus on what your objectives are from going Composable. So having pre-built integrations can be an accelerator to move to sort of moving forward with Composable. It can also add complexity to, you know, future separation. So you're sort of tying, you're leaning on a software provider to provide the integration between multiple systems, which means you're less likely to be able to, you know, separate that integration at a later point and replace parts of that flow. So let's say you have an integration between an e-commerce tool and an order management system, which is quite common, and that's a pre-built integration. Now let's, you know, have the premise that you found a best of breed tool to do a specific part of order management better. That can be hard then, you know, now you're taking that, now you need to take that integration and split it between 3 systems instead of 2. And that can sort of add complexity to future changes. I think the advent of API orchestration tools in a layer that is sometimes referred to as digital experience composition, so a DXC layer, but let's refer to it as API orchestration, is an interesting sort of thing that's happening. To get the full effect out of Composable, we really have to think about minimizing dependencies between tools. So, and again, there's no absolutes, you know, a pure microservice architecture in a classic computer science sense, there are 0 dependencies between microservices, but that's an almost impossible architecture to maintain across a larger business system. So there will always be some dependencies, and it's a trade-off. But the more dependencies you create between systems, the less flexible your architecture gets for future changes, and the more expensive it will be to make those changes in the future. So it's as with all architecture, the short-term, long-term trade-off is the hardest part to get right.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't have any specific names to hand, but we're already hearing stories in the market of businesses who have started their Composable journey, but actually they've got to the point now where they're looking at, okay, let's look to chop and change some of our components, and it's not quite as easy as they had hoped because of how it's been put together. I guess links back nicely to your conversation around avoiding the glue monster, right? Because I mean, it's never quite as straightforward as pulling one out and putting one in, but equally, it should be far easier than if something's been glued to something else, like maybe you would have in a monolith.
Absolutely, I think there's, I mean, you know, I've built Composable setups like that were quite sort of heavily integrated, because when we started doing this, the tooling wasn't there, but also the sort of experience wasn't there to really have that sort of dependency minimization. I think there's you know, you have to acknowledge that you know, if you build a system and you want to minimize dependencies, you have to invest in minimizing dependencies. That has to be an active choice you make. I mean, one of the things about Composable is we can optimize a Composable architecture for any parameter you want, but obviously only for the parameters that you consciously choose to optimize for. So if you put future sort of flexibility and minimizing dependencies high on your list of KPIs, say, then you can certainly now, especially with the tooling we have, build something where replacing blocks is significantly easier than what we built 4 or 5 years ago. Basically because the tooling is better, but also the awareness is better. but that doesn't mean that it happens on its own. Like it's a little bit similar to, with the first generation Composable, there were a lot of challenges with employee experience. As I say to a lot of my clients now, I can optimize for any employee experience. I can build a much better employee experience on Composable than you would get on a monolith, and we've proven that in numerous occasions. It's just that you have to make that conscious choice, and you have to invest in it. You have to believe it's worth, that there's ROI in investing in that. And I think it's the same with this sort of problem of tight dependencies. Is you have to choose to invest in it because you see a future ROI. And again, that's a hard thing to do because the pressure for a CDO or a head of e-commerce is to deliver results in the short term often, and the advantages of Composable over monolith often show up in the long term.
Yeah.
So it is. I mean, and that's our challenge as leaders in the space is to also insist that we think and invest in the long term, and avoid future heavy costs. I think in that, I mean, I'm also talking to clients who've been on Composable and who are moving back to sort of a more monolithic setup. Let's say they've been on sort of a headless Composable setup for 3-4 years, and I think that's actually also a very reasonable thing to do. I mean, I think you come in as a fairly immature organization, you choose Composable because you're not 100% sure what your requirements are, which is the truth. So you're trying to build something that has flexibility in the future. And then let's say 3-4 years down the line, especially these 3-4 years where the e-commerce industry in, let's say, 2019 before the pandemic was a very, very different beast than it is in 2023 and likely into 2024. And now you make an analysis and you say, well, actually, now I know what my most important features are, and I can map those out because I've been through a process, and I can map those back into a monolith. And I actually think that business case makes sense for me. And I know that it'll give me less future flexibility, but from a maturity perspective, I'm in a different place. I think that's absolutely can be a good choice for a business. And that's different from saying that the Composable choice was wrong, because they wouldn't have been able to choose the right monolith 4 years ago. So I think there's sort of that challenge where I don't think it's not necessarily that in every phase of the business it's right for everyone. And I think if you're looking long term at things, you have to also acknowledge that those choices come with a certain risk.
I think you make a fair point, and it's something that two of the guests in season 4 actually touched upon as well. One of them is working at a women's retail brand, and they've decided that they've been Composable for the best part of 10 years now, well before it was the buzzword it is now, and they've decided actually their business is better suited on a Shopify Plus, for example. So they're now in the process of migrating away because it does what they needed to do, and that served them better. And another chap I spoke to, they went through a long couple of year transformation program and got to the end of it, and given how tough this year's been for them and the increased costs that they've incurred from it, they said, Joe, maybe that wasn't the right decision. Maybe it will be, but Joe, what maybe it isn't with hindsight. But you know what, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and no one expected 2023 to be the year that it has been. So all of that flexibility that you planned for, you haven't been able to use any of it because it's been a poor year and the revenue hasn't been coming through the door and what have you. So I guess, yeah, like we said, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I guess going back to the point that you made about future-proofing the business and looking longer term as well, which is a challenge that many leaders face, is okay, how can we get this making ROI for us here and now, and actually 3-5 years down the line is often not a priority. But I guess we'll come on to this in a bit more detail probably shortly when I ask you for your top tips that you advise customers on. But let's go to the next question first of all, though, and I like this one because it's very heavy hitting. And I guess in your opinion, what is the number one reason that Composable transformations fail?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to nail it down to one, but I have a couple. But I think at at the high level, I think it's losing sight of why you went into the composable transformation, which is typically sort of the long-term freedom, flexibility, the ability to innovate, and the sort of idea that you never have to re-platform again, which is, let's be honest, that's a core driver here, is that most organizations in 2023 have been on commerce and digital projects long enough that they've experienced a couple of these major replatforms or upgrades that are just time consuming, financially problematic, really painful, and never want to do that again. So I think the number one to me is losing sight of why you started the composable transformation. I think that's the overarching theme. And it's sort of back to the short term, long term. If you don't remember the sort of reasoning behind it, and reality sets in 2023 hits, then perception is reality in that sense. Then it feels like your composable transformation has failed. That, which to me is sort of a fake failure, because it's probably delivering a lot of what you wanted from it when you started. But if that's not what you need now, then that's a different perspective. I think underneath that is I think there's a perception that in some parts there's a perception that composable and MACH needs to follow a set of enterprise architecture principles to be viable. So I think sometimes what I've seen in the market is unnecessary complexity in these setups. So a lack of focus on the process of building the composable architecture, on simplicity, and on really minimizing these dependencies and investing in them. So sort of which is really the glue code that I was talking about with my colleagues at eCommerce Expo. So you get this really, really complex set of integrations that either you've built or you've gotten from somewhere, or your SI has built, and then you sort of realize that the flexibility you may have the long-term flexibility to be able to replace bits, but you've lost the sort of a short-term flexibility because your setup becomes so complicated that bringing new customer experiences to market can be a daunting task with all these tools. I mean, that's not unique. I've seen that in monolithic deployments for, before I started doing composable, we did headless, but before that I've done, my share of large monolithic commerce implementations. And it's not that different. You add complexity to the system until it no longer, it can change fast enough. And then that's when the replatform comes in. And if you're not careful, you can get to the same place with composable by just, building too much integration code, too much complexity in that layer.
Do you feel that comes from a lack of knowledge and understanding, either internally or from the third parties, or maybe just selecting the wrong third parties to do the delivery and the implementation, or maybe a bit of both?
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, I've sort of said, I have this idea that when you choose a partner to do this sort of thing, experience is really important. So having done this before is really important, but the willingness to experiment is maybe even more important. So I think there's technology is moving fast. We all know technology is moving fast. We all know that, it's likely that if the market sees a set of problems, then, within 18 months, there will be solutions available. And they may not be, enterprise solutions in a classical sense or proven. They may not be in a magic quadrant anywhere or at that level, but they may be actual really good solutions to specific problems. So I think there's a need to mix that experience. If you're just taking, if we as an agency just take what we did last time and say, hey, I have an accelerator or a blueprint for you, I'm just going to lay this down onto your business. Then, I mean, there's two problems with that. One is, how old is that reference architecture? Is that is it the third time? Are we 2 years into it? What has changed in the space in the meantime? But also just that the promise of composable to some level is to get a customized solution that works for your company, that optimizes for your specific KPIs without the complexity of, what we would traditionally call build by, at a cost that's similar to a monolith, you can get a customized solution. But if you're just taking a blueprint, so I think there's something about this need to constantly figure out and experiment with things and try things and trust a developer perspective as well to sort of come in and say, hey, I think this is a viable solution. So I think there's the agency SI world is also changing. So we need to adapt as well to a different way of working.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say technology is moving as fast as it probably ever has done at the minute. And whilst we're constantly encouraging our customers to innovate, to meet the consumer demands as well as the internal employee demands, I think it's safe to say that sometimes you just need to take a step back and look at, okay, what do we need to change? Why do we need to change before making decisions? Because otherwise you could find yourself in this kind of constant cycle and maybe not actually getting the rewards and the benefit of the work you've just spent the last 18 months doing.
And
okay.
And I think there's something, I often quote Amara's law, which says that we tend to overestimate the effect of change in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And I think that's been one of my arguments for really going a composable route, which is, we can't jump on every hype curve because we would go bankrupt in technology investments, but we have to be ready to act on the ones that do, make significant changes to our industry or the world in general. And I think the sort of openness of composable platform really lends itself to do that. You can make your own choices about which hype curves you experiment with, which ones you go down and which ones you don't. But that also puts a responsibility on you as a business. If you have a monolith, if you're on Shopify or you're on Salesforce Commerce Cloud, there's a comfort in sort of knowing that if it becomes important enough, it will show up on their roadmap.
We spoke about Shopify a little bit and just go off piece slightly, but they're definitely a business that's going from strength to strength at the minute. If you were to summarize it quickly, how do you see Shopify developing over the next couple of years?
Wow.
Do you see them making a move into true enterprise? Because that's kind of the hot conversation right now. Is the product capable of doing so?
I think the short answer is yes. I don't see, but I don't think necessarily it's as much about Shopify developing as it's about true enterprise changing their mind on what constitutes viable platforms. Okay. I think I'm seeing a lot of enterprise companies experiment with software that 5 years ago would not have even entered the door, because there's this realization that things change fast and we need to adapt. And so I think there's a mindset change in enterprise, at least in the Nordics as well, where there's a sort of a more open mind towards trying technologies that wouldn't classically be called enterprise if the ROI is there. So you get much more sort of ROI business driven. I think on the flip side, I think one of the big advantages that Shopify had for a long time was cost, and I just think they're like part of the counter move is that they're losing that advantage. I mean, I have a lot of customers where we've worked on business cases where it just isn't a particularly cheap technology to run because of the various ways it increases your cost on the transaction side, on the payment side, so I think there are. And I think also, the challenge of Shopify in a place like the Nordics is that every company here is born multi-market. And multi-market has always been one of the challenges of this type of platform. Not Shopify alone, but so the complexity and the cost of running Shopify in 10, 15 markets can be a significant driver to do something else.
something that I'm sure they're trying to work on, though, right? But yeah, I mean, it's slightly off piece in terms of question, but it's certainly a platform we see going from strength to strength, picking up more market share, slowly edging its way towards what we would define as enterprise. And yes, there's going to be challenges along the way as the platform scales, but it seems on the whole like the feedback we're hearing is pretty positive.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, this is not. I mean, I think there's definitely a lot there, and it's a super relevant platform for a lot of brands. It's just not as black and white as I think sometimes we make it out in terms of as an either or there.
Time will tell. That's what we can say. So, when you're engaged with the customers, as I'm sure you are regularly, what are the top 3 tips that you would advise any end customer to do before starting their composable journey?
Yeah. So I think, number one is find someone who's done it before. And that doesn't have to be an agency or an SI. It could be an agency or an SI. And I think, it could be a colleague from a different brand. Just find someone who's been through that transformation before. Ask them, what went well, but specifically ask them what went badly and what they would change if they were going to do it again. And frankly, if the answer is they wouldn't change anything, then you should probably run away. That doesn't seem realistic. I mean, in the context of technology has changed around them since they started. What would they do differently today? I think is an important question. That doesn't mean they wouldn't do the same in the same scenario at the same point in time. But if they were asked to sort of rebuild the architecture, find someone who's done it and who's willing to talk about the pains as well. I think that's important. Then I think I'm going to contradict myself from a little bit earlier, but I do think that really having conversations with a set of system software providers, software as a service providers in this space is a relevant step. I would say, try and talk to if you need, let's say, an order management system or e-commerce platform, try and talk to 2 or 3 platforms that are differently positioned in the market and try to understand what that difference means. So if you talk to someone like, let's say, a BigCommerce that has a very broad offering, and you talk to someone like Commerce Layer that has a very narrow offering only on the transactional side, I think that's sort of an eye opener as to how different these architectures can be, and try to understand that. Then I think the third tip, I've touched on it before, is look at your data flows, look at the different types of data, like have a strong opinion on where product data is born in your organization, where it gets enhanced, where it's needed. The same for customer data, the same for transactional data, and prioritize. So figure out in which of these areas do you need distinctiveness. Is it important you innovate? Because most businesses don't have the luxurious position of innovating and pushing the boundaries in everywhere. So you need to make some choices. Are you coming at this because you want to innovate and be distinct on the front end, on the customer experience side? Do you want to be distinct on the supply chain order management side? Do you want to be distinct on the pricing? Where is it that you think you need to push a competitive advantage, which is sort of really a strategic discussion about your company, and specifically talk to providers in those areas. So I think that's important. And then that was probably 3 already. I'll add one more. I think having KPIs around the like written down KPIs around the advantages of going composable is critical to me. So if all your KPIs are around conversion rate and engagement time and sort of classic e-commerce KPIs, and you're not writing down KPIs around the ability to innovate in the future, your time to market, your speed of deployment, then I think you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to look at your investment and you're going to at least start doubting yourself, because you're doing this for those reasons. But if they're not written down targets and KPIs, then you're going to forget them sort of organizationally. and you'll start wondering why. I mean, if my competitors can get the same conversion rate on Shopify, why am I doing this? But you're doing it because you want to keep your ability to innovate and change, and your flexibility, your ability to go to market fast with new features in the future. Those are the reasons. And if you don't write them down in KPIs, I think the long term is going to be lost, and it may look like a failed transformation at the end.
I like that. I think often when I ask that question or something similar, the answers are predominantly about here and now and what they should be doing right now, which you would kind of expect given the question that I ask. But actually, something that's equally as important is being able to measure its ROI over time as well. As you touched upon earlier in the conversation, one of the key benefits of Composable is the flexibility that you get later down the line,
Yeah.
and putting yourself and the business in a position where you can actually measure that over time is equally as important as getting yourself ready to do it right now.
Yeah.
The other point I really liked is the first one you mentioned, just speaking to somebody and actually maybe a a, a, a colleague or a mutual connection of someone that you know is possibly best placed to tell you the nitty gritties of everything. Because if you go to an SI or a vendor, there could be a slight sales twist on there because they maybe want to get some work or what have you. But actually having someone who's experienced it firsthand
Yeah.
will give you all you need to know, and specifically asking them would you change is a great question, something that we don't ask enough in any aspect of our life. Obviously the alternative option is to listen to this podcast as well, and hopefully that gives everyone all the insights that they need. But I like that. No, thanks Thomas, there was some really good tips there, and yeah, I think we just move on from there because I feel like you summarized that perfectly well. So the next question then is also a very very prominent one, and one that I think is super important because we are already hearing of transformations that are maybe failing or certainly not going as expected. So in your opinion, what is the number one thing you would advise any end customer to check before finalizing their SI selection?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this one. I think it's I mean, obviously I'm biased being on the agency side. I think I've touched on it a little bit before. I think you need you need experience from your SI. So you need them to sort of have done this before, have built composable transformations before. But I think this willingness to experiment is critical as well. So I think if you're talking to an SI and they come in early and they say they have all the answers, and provide an architecture and say, these are the tools you need, this is how it's going to string together, we did this for X brand before, I would be a little bit cautious, because again, the promise of Composable is a solution adapted to your needs and your specific KPIs. And if an agency is taking too much, so it's a balance. So if an agency is taking too much of a sort of, accelerator approach, we have these 4 tools and we know they work well together, then I would be a little bit concerned that they're not hearing you and your unique needs, and it becomes more of a standard solution based on sort of a composable architecture, which is still better than a standard monolithic solution from flexibility. But I would like my SIs to really sort of dive into my challenges and sort of really think about and have measured responses about what I want to achieve as a business, rather than sort of what they've done before. So I think check the experience and the previous cases exist, but dive into your own case with them and really make sure that you get a sense that they're hearing you and your KPIs and your needs, beyond sort of coming up with a standard solution. I think that would be my number one.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a very fair point as well. As you said, the idea of Composable is something that you have is unique to your business and your business challenges. And if you've got an agency that's just saying, we can put this together really fast, we've done it for this customer, well, hang on a minute, that customer, how relevant are they versus us? Like, what challenges do they face versus the challenges that we face, etc. It might sound great that you can get this thing up and running in months, with less complexity, but actually, does that really solve the problems you want it to solve? And I guess ultimately it goes back to listening. We all know that listening is one of the most important attributes we can have as a partner in any sense of the field, and actually have the SI listen to your challenges and your requirements.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice, like it. All right, perfect. So final question then before we wrap this up is, where do you see the market going from here?
Yeah, I mean that one is tough. I mean, I think we're seeing customer acquisition costs continuing to rise, both due to increased competition and due to sort of SEO challenges. Those are like organic traffic challenges seem to be getting worse. I think AI generated content is not going to help. I think that a couple of the real sort of benefits of Composable are going to so we're going to see, from a Composable perspective, we're going to see two things. We're already seeing companies, failing in their transformations and going back. And in my opinion, we shouldn't necessarily see that as an indictment of the Composable idea, but look at it as, specific failures of taming complexity. So that's on one hand. I think we're going to see more of a measured market, and more sort of hybrids happen. But I also think we're going to see some of the big success stories that Composable can provide around, and I see sort of two, maybe three areas where I think it can really shine. One is omnichannel, which has historically been really, really hard for any company using, monolithic systems, trying to set that up through ERP systems. Those projects have been massively expensive and not particularly successful in many cases. And I think there's really sort of an opening to do some really interesting things on sort of omnichannel order management side with Composable. I think personalization. I sometimes joke that I've been in this industry since the late 90s, and I think in every period of that life, I've worked on personalization projects with clients, and very rarely have I seen it used, because the truth is that generating new content for each segment or for individuals is really expensive and really prohibitive. So actually building the personalization engine is the easier part of personalization, but providing personalized content is very difficult for most brands unless you have very large teams. And I think the advent of sort of AI content generation is really going to change that, which means that suddenly the value of having those fully integrated data chains, so CDPs linked to front ends, all of those integrations that Composable can really help optimize, is that value is going to be unlocked in some cases in the coming month and years, because of the other side of personalization being an easier problem to solve. I think, and this is just me guessing, but I think we've been through sort of a period where e-commerce was sort of moving to these dominant platforms, Amazon obviously being the big one. And I think from sort of a personalization, personal experience perspective, we're going to see a rise of more niche players. So I think, technology and the supply chain and drop shipping, the ability to create, very, very narrow focused niche players on specific types of products with content, with better experiences, because there's more knowledge behind, is a really interesting development. I think we've seen it over the last many years, but I think that can accelerate as well, just because the technology is so mature to spin up an e-commerce and focus on the customer experience, on the knowledge. And then, I mean, you can't ask me where the market goes without mentioning AI, sort of LLMs and things like that, where I think, I mean, the customers I talk to, there's a clear advantage of Composable, of API-based setups in emerging markets like that, because nobody knows what tool is going to be the dominant tool in 3 months. And having the ability to integrate to any tool with any set of APIs, I think, can be a very big advantage here, as opposed to sort of hoping that your e-commerce provider or your content management system puts it on their roadmap, and then probably only with the specific tooling.
I mean, the rise of AI is obviously a hot topic right now, and I think alongside Composable, that was the Ecom Expo a few months ago, right? It was either composable commerce or it was generative AI, and it was like
Yeah.
maybe 100 different talks between the two of them. It's safe to say there's still a lot that can be unlocked with that. Something I want to touch on there. You mentioned a fully personalized experience could be a matter of months, if not maybe a year away. So that, I mean, that's something that's huge, particularly for like D2C retail brands, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I know I'm not alone in receiving like crappy marketing and stuff that is just not relevant to me.
Yeah.
And I've always felt there's a huge opportunity there for retailers to really unlock a loyal customer base. And I mean, I don't know the complexities behind it all. It's obviously really, really tough, from personalized outreach to going on a website and getting a personalized experience. But for me, that's a real game changer. And you think it could be that close?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about personalization at that level has been, the technology is available. Amazon is very good at it. But it's been very expensive. But I think a large part of the cost has really been in content generation. So I mean, we've experimented with things like using Midjourney not to produce product images, but to overlay those product images in. So let's say you're a furniture company and it's the same piece of furniture you want to show, but I want to recognize that you're, British and I'm Scandinavian and someone else is Spanish and our homes look different. So when I have when I want to show assets of that in location, I would love to show you, that same piece of furniture in a typical British home, and me, in a Nordic minimalist home, and someone from Spain with in a local setting. And I think that's been, for most brands, prohibitively expensive. And I think that the fact that we can start doing these things is really, to me, going to accelerate the interest in investing in the technological capabilities to provide that to you. So I think the challenge has been companies that have built these personalization architectures have often struggled to create, unique, interesting content, because at the end of the day, personalization is really about, content for you specifically. And there are examples now where we can do interesting things. And I think once we can do that at a reasonable cost, the technology to actually then provide it becomes more interesting, obviously, because I think we were through there was a big period with the big sort of monolithic digital experience platforms where everyone was investing heavily in these technologies, but very few companies actually used them because of this, because, actually having a team of content editors and asset managers that could provide relevant content was impossible. So I do think that is going to change, also because the need to be distinct is increasing. I mean, the e-com acquisition costs are going, through the roof. Paid is a problem, or organic is a problem. It's just a real challenge for a lot of brands, and one solution is to go down this route and be more distinctive and more personalized.
Yeah, I like it. And I mean, yeah, I mean, personally, I know that'd have a real big impact in me as a consumer. So yeah, interesting. If that really, I mean, if we're going to start seeing that come into effect in 2024, possibly early 2025, I think that could be a real game changer. So yeah, let's see. Yeah,
I'm
I'll
hoping
be.
at least.
Yeah,
We're,
yeah.
I,
Let's
I
see.
mean, I'm saying it partially because we're having those conversations with
Okay.
brands and companies, and whether or not, then it still has to, it still has to be built and gone to market and has to be successful and stuff. But I think there's an interest in using these LLM technologies to do that sort of thing.
Okay. Like it. Well, yeah, awesome. Then I guess yeah, let's watch this space, because it's a big move.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
nice. Well, that leads us nicely then, I guess, to the end of the episode. Look, really, really appreciate your time, Thomas, and um, thank you for sharing all of the insights that you shared. Spoke very openly about some of the conversations that you've been having. I think you gave some great tips to end customers to really consider before they make the move, and also we spoke about maybe Composable isn't quite right for you, and that's okay. And I think that's important to know as well. Is this is podcast that's put together to be educational. And yes, there is a big shift towards that composable mindset, but actually it's not for every business. And you've got to look at the pros and cons and ultimately look at what suits your business before making any technology decisions. I really enjoyed the chat, and hopefully the listeners did too. So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me. I also really enjoyed the chat. I hope it's useful to people. People can reach out on LinkedIn if they have questions, and or reach out to you, and you can pass them on if if anyone takes my advice and wants to talk to people who've been through this before. I can probably point in the direction of some people that have worked in this space for a while.
Well, we'll certainly be tagging you in a few of the posts, so everyone will have access to your profile, and appreciate your willingness to help out further. So look, as always, if you're tuning in and you're finding this useful, please do subscribe. Please like and share amongst your network. If each episode can help one person make an informed decision for their transformation, then it's doing its job. That's it for today. Thanks again, Thomas, and
Thank you.
we'll see you in the next episode.